Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Family Facade. Corey Nixon had always prided himself on reading people. 20 years as a private investigator had honed his instincts to a razor's edge, teaching him that the most dangerous lies came wrapped in the most beautiful truths. But standing in his marble-floored kitchen that Friday evening, watching his wife Jeanette Harrell Nixon prepare dinner, while their 12-year-old daughter Myra bounced excitedly about her first high school party invitation, he felt only the warm contentment of a man who believed he'd built something unshakable. "Dad, can you believe Kelly Hopper invited me? She's like the coolest 8th grader ever." Myra's auburn hair caught the light as she spun around, her excitement infectious. Corey ruffled her hair, his weathered hands gentle despite their size. "Just remember what we talked about, sweetheart. Smart choices, and call if you need anything." Jeanette looked up from the stove, her blonde hair perfectly styled even after a full day at her real estate office. "Corey, she'll be fine. It's just a pool party at the Hopper house. Agnes Cervantes will be their chaperoning." She smiled that radiant smile that had captured his heart 15 years ago. "You worry too much." The evening felt like countless others in their Westfield home. Corey had built this life methodically. The successful PI business, the house in the best neighborhood, the family that was the envy of their social circle. After a childhood of foster homes and military service that had shown him the worst of humanity, he'd created his sanctuary. At 42, Corey's imposing 6-foot frame and steel-gray eyes still commanded respect. His reputation in the investigation business was built on two principles: absolute loyalty to those who earned it, and absolute destruction for those who betrayed it. His wife and daughter were his world, the only people who'd ever seen the gentleman beneath the predator. "I've got that background check to finish up tonight," Corey said, kissing Jeanette's forehead. "The Hoffman divorce case should be wrapped up by the time you get back from dropping Myra off." "Actually," Jeanette said, not meeting his eyes, "Mom's picking her up. She wanted to spend some time with Myra before the party." Corey nodded, though something nagged at him. Donna Tyler, his mother-in-law, had been increasingly present lately, always with reasons that sounded perfectly reasonable. Still, family was family, and he'd learned to pick his battles. The call came at 11:47 p.m. "Mr. Nixon, this is Dr. Francis Calhoun at Westfield General. Your daughter was brought in from a party. You need to come immediately." The 20-minute drive felt like hours. Corey's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Myra was responsible, careful. What could have happened? The hospital's fluorescent lights felt harsh and accusing as he strode through the automatic doors. The desk nurse directed him to the 3rd floor, where he found Dr. Calhoun waiting with 2 police officers. "Mr. Nixon," the doctor began, his face grave. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but—" "Wait." Detective Leonard Hood stepped forward, his expression serious. "Mr. Nixon, before you see your daughter, I need to warn you. What happened tonight? You must not see her. Not yet. We need to prepare you for what you're going to find." Corey's blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about? What happened to my daughter?" Dr. Calhoun's voice was barely above a whisper. "Sorry, but we couldn't prevent what happened to her. The trauma was too severe by the time she arrived." The words hit Corey like physical blows. His vision tunneled, and he had to grip the wall to keep from falling. His little girl, his Myra. 15 minutes later, as he sat in the waiting room with his head in his hands, he heard something that stopped his heart. Laughter. Not just any laughter. Jeanette's distinctive musical laugh. The one she saved for truly joyful moments. He looked up to see his wife and mother-in-law emerging from the hallway that led to the patient rooms. They were smiling, talking in low, animated voices. Donna Tyler even looked relieved. "Jeanette," Corey's voice cracked. How can you be laughing?" "Our daughter." Jeanette's face immediately transformed into a mask of grief, but not before Corey caught something in her eyes. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Oh, honey," she said, rushing to his side. "I'm sorry. Mom was just telling me about something to distract me from the pain. You know how I get when I'm overwhelmed." But Corey's trained, I caught everything. The way Donna Tyler quickly looked away, the slight delay in Jeanette's emotional shift, the fact that neither woman's makeup was disturbed by tears. "Can I see her now?" he asked. "The doctors are still working," Jeanette said quickly. "They said it might be a while. Maybe we should go home and wait for them to call." That night, Corey didn't sleep. He lay in bed next to his wife, listening to her breathing, analyzing every interaction from the evening. Something was wrong. Terribly, fundamentally wrong. By dawn, he'd made a decision. If someone was playing games with his family, they were about to learn why Corey Nixon had never lost a case, and why his enemies had a habit of disappearing from his life permanently. Chapter 2. Unraveling the Web. The next morning, Corey arrived at Westfield General at 6 a.m., 2 hours before visiting hours began. His years of cultivating contacts had taught him that hospital security guards were often former cops looking for easier work, and that they appreciated a fellow professional who spoke their language. "Terrible thing about the Nixon girl," security guard Dale Hodges said, accepting the coffee Corey had brought. "Though, I gotta say, strangest reaction I've ever seen from family members." Corey kept his expression neutral. "How do you mean?" "Well, usually when kids come in from accidents, the parents are beside themselves. Your wife and her mother, though, they seemed more like they were celebrating something. Even asked about discharge paperwork before they'd even seen the girl." The first crack in the facade. Corey filed it away and continued his investigation. Dr. Francis Calhoun was more forthcoming than expected when Corey cornered him during his morning rounds. "Your daughter wasn't in the condition we initially reported," he admitted reluctantly. "There was some confusion in the communication. She had some scrapes and bruises, possibly from a fall, but nothing life-threatening. The police involvement was requested by your wife. Something about suspected foul play that never materialized." The second crack. By noon, Corey had spoken to 6 hospital staff members, 3 police officers, and 2 paramedics. The picture emerging made his blood run cold. Myra had indeed been brought to the hospital, but not as the victim of some terrible accident. She'd been brought in by Agnes Cervantes, who'd found her locked in a storage shed behind the Hopper house, crying and claiming her mother had told her to hide there and not come out no matter what. The paramedics had found minor injuries consistent with deliberately inflicted bruises. Someone had hurt his daughter on purpose. The police had been called not by the hospital, but by Jeanette herself, who'd arrived before Corey and had specifically requested that he be told Myra was gravely injured and that he shouldn't see her. Corey sat in his car outside the hospital, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. Someone had deliberately hurt his daughter and manipulated him into believing she was dying. Someone who had access to their family schedule, who knew he would respond exactly as he had. Someone close enough to orchestrate this entire scenario. His phone buzzed with a text from Jeanette. "Myra's doing better. Doctors say she can come home tomorrow. You're such a good father. She's lucky to have you." The emotional manipulation was textbook, designed to make him grateful rather than suspicious. But Corey had spent too many years seeing through lies to fall for it now. He drove to his office and pulled up the surveillance system he'd had installed around their house 6 months earlier. Officially, it was for security. Unofficially, Corey Nixon trusted no one completely, a habit that was about to save his life. The footage from the past 3 weeks revealed a pattern that made his stomach churn. Jeanette meeting with a man Corey didn't recognize at coffee shops across town. Donna Tyler making frequent visits when Corey was out of town on cases. Most damning of all, a clear shot of Jeanette and the unknown man kissing passionately in Corey's own driveway while he'd been in Chicago on a missing persons case. But it was the timestamp on the final video that sealed his wife's fate. Yesterday afternoon, 3 hours before Myra's party, showing Jeanette and the stranger entering the house with Myra, then leaving 20 minutes later without her. Myra never made it to any party. Corey recognized the look in the man's eyes from the surveillance footage. He'd seen it in war zones and crime scenes, the cold satisfaction of someone who enjoyed inflicting pain. This wasn't just about adultery. This was about something much darker. He ran the stranger's license plate through his contacts at the DMV. The name that came back made his blood run cold. Joel Walsh, recently released from a 7-year stint in federal prison for charges involving exploitation of minors. Corey closed his laptop and walked to his office safe. Inside, among the usual documents and emergency cash, was a .45 caliber pistol he'd hoped never to use again. Next to it was a small black notebook containing contact information for men who, like him, had learned in the military that some problems required permanent solutions. He thought about Myra, probably confused and traumatized, wondering why her father hadn't come to save her immediately. He thought about the years of marriage to a woman who could orchestrate her own daughter's abuse for whatever sick game she was playing. Most of all, he thought about the promise he'd made to himself long ago. Anyone who betrayed his trust didn't get a second chance. They didn't get to explain, apologize, or make amends. They simply ceased to exist. But first, he needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal. Jeanette and Joel Walsh had made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed they were dealing with a naive husband who would never see through their manipulation. They were about to learn that Corey Nixon had never been naive about anything. Chapter 3. The Depth of Betrayal. Corey spent the next 48 hours constructing a web of surveillance that would have impressed federal agents. Using equipment from his PI business and contacts from his military days, he turned his own home into a monitoring station while maintaining the facade of a worried father waiting for his daughter's recovery. Myra came home Tuesday evening, quiet and withdrawn, but physically unharmed. Corey held her close, noting the way she flinched when Jeanette approached and how she kept looking at the doors as if planning escape routes. His daughter was traumatized, but alive, and she was the key to understanding what had really happened. That night, after Jeanette had gone to bed, early claiming exhaustion, Corey sat with Myra in her room. "Sweetheart, I need you to tell me exactly what happened at the party. All of it." Myra's eyes filled with tears. "There wasn't really a party, Dad. Mom drove me to this house, and there was this man there. He was scary, and he kept asking me questions about you, about your work, your clients, where you keep your files." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't about a simple affair. This was about Corey's business, his cases, his clients, many of whom were wealthy individuals going through messy divorces with secrets worth killing for. "What kind of questions, baby?" "He wanted to know about the papers in your office, especially anything about Mr. Randall Steele. Mom told him you've been working on something big, something that could make us rich." Myra wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "When I said I didn't know anything, he got angry. Mom told him to put me in the shed until you came looking for me, and then they would... What would they do, Myra?" "They said they would hurt you, Dad. Really hurt you. And then the man would take over your business, and Mom would get all the money from your clients." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Mom said you were stupid and that she never loved you anyway." Corey's vision went red for a moment, but he forced himself to stay calm for his daughter's sake. The plan was becoming clear. Stage a crisis with Myra to get Corey emotional and off balance. Then use his distracted state to either kill him or frame him for something that would destroy his business and reputation. Meanwhile, Jeanette would play the grieving widow and inherit everything he'd built. The Randall Steele case was worth $50 million in assets. Corey had uncovered evidence that Steele's wife was hiding money in offshore accounts, information that could swing the divorce settlement dramatically. If someone could get access to that evidence and sell it to the highest bidder. "Myra, I need you to do something for me, and it's very important. Can you be brave?" She nodded, though her lower lip trembled. "I'm going to send you to stay with Uncle Bruce for a few days. You remember him from the barbecues? He's going to keep you safe while I take care of some business. But you can't tell Mom where you're going, and you can't tell her we talked about any of this. Can you do that?" Bruce Eastman wasn't actually Corey's brother, but they'd served together in Afghanistan and had maintained the kind of bond that transcended blood. More importantly, Bruce specialized in personal security and wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone who threatened someone under his protection. The next morning, Corey implemented the first phase of his counterplan. While Jeanette was at her real estate office, he transferred Myra to Bruce's secure compound upstate, telling his wife that their daughter was staying with his fictional sister for psychological counseling after her trauma. Jeanette's reaction told him everything. Instead of insisting on knowing which therapist or demanding to speak with this sister she'd never heard of, she simply nodded and said she thought it was probably for the best. That afternoon, Corey received a text from an unknown number. Your daughter's safe, but not for long. We have what we need from your office. Time to retire, old man. They made their move too early. While they thought Myra was still within their reach, she was actually 200 miles away with a man who'd killed Taliban fighters with his bare hands. While they thought they'd gained access to his office, they'd actually accessed a decoy system Corey had set up years ago for exactly this scenario. But most importantly, they'd revealed that there were more people involved than just Jeanette and Joel Walsh. Corey opened his laptop and began typing a message to 5 very specific contacts from his military days. Men who, like him, had been permanently changed by war and had found civilian life lacking in meaningful purpose. Men who would relish the opportunity to apply their unique skills to a personal matter for their old commander. By sunset, Herbert Lloyd was positioned across the street from Joel Walsh's apartment with a sniper rifle. Francisco Huber was monitoring Donna Tyler's house with recording equipment that could pick up conversations through walls. Vernon Lord had taken a job as a maintenance worker at Jeanette's real estate office, giving him access to her computer and phone records. And Corey himself was preparing for the final phase of a plan that would ensure none of his betrayers lived to enjoy their victory. He thought about the man he'd been before war, had stripped away his illusions about human nature. That man might have tried to reason with his wife, might have sought therapy or mediation or legal remedies. But that man had died in an Afghan cave when his own commanding officer had tried to sell him and his team to insurgents for drug money. The man who'd emerged from that betrayal understood that some people were simply predators who would never stop hunting until they were permanently stopped. Jeanette Harrell Nixon, Joel Walsh, and anyone else involved in this conspiracy had made the same mistake as his former CEO. They'd assumed Corey's loyalty made him weak, that his love for his family made him vulnerable. Tomorrow, they would learn that a predator's greatest strength was the ability to make his enemies believe he was prey. Chapter 4. The Hunter's Past. 20 years ago, Staff Sergeant Corey Nixon had learned the most important lesson of his life while bleeding out in a Taliban cave, listening to his commanding officer negotiate the sale of his team's location for 2 kilograms of heroin. The betrayal hadn't just cost him 3 of his closest friends. It had taught him that the capacity for evil existed in everyone, hidden behind masks of love, loyalty, and friendship. When he'd finally escaped and systematically eliminated every person involved in that betrayal, from the CEO to the Afghan middleman to the stateside dealer who'd facilitated the transaction, he'd made himself a promise. Never again would he be the victim. Now, sitting in his office at 3 a.m. while his wife slept peacefully in their bed, Corey allowed himself to remember the skills that had kept him alive when the world went dark. The army had trained him to be efficient, but Afghanistan had made him ruthless. The difference between a soldier and a predator wasn't about rules of engagement. It was about accepting that some threats required permanent solutions. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Herbert Lloyd. Package acquired. Walsh meeting unknown female, apartment 4B. Recommend immediate escalation. Corey pulled up the surveillance feed. Herbert was streaming from his position. The unknown female was a brunette in her 30s, someone Corey didn't recognize, but whose body language suggested familiarity with violence. She moved like a professional, military or law enforcement background, possibly private security. Another player in the game. The conspiracy was larger than he'd initially calculated. A second message arrived from Francisco Huber, mother-in-law hosting strategy session. 3 additional males present. Heavy hardware visible. This is bigger than family drama, boss. Corey felt the familiar calm that had once made him legendary among special operations units. The more complex the threat, the more methodical his response became. Emotion was a luxury for people who fought fair battles. Corey had learned long ago that survival required embracing the darkness that civilized people pretended didn't exist. He opened his secure laptop and began accessing resources he'd hoped never to use again. Swiss bank accounts containing funds from his government work that had never been officially reported. Contact lists of mercenaries, weapons dealers, and information brokers who operated in the spaces between legal and illegal. Most importantly, The detailed psychological profiles he'd compiled on everyone in his life over the past 15 years, including his wife. Jeanette's profile made for disturbing reading. A woman with narcissistic tendencies who'd been attracted to his military record not for the heroism, but for the danger it represented. Someone who collected secrets and had an unusual fascination with true crime documentaries featuring manipulative women. Most tellingly, someone who'd asked far too many specific questions about his military service and his current clients over the years. He dismissed it as curiosity. Now he realized she'd been building a database for exactly this kind of operation. The psychological assessment he'd done on Donna Tyler was equally revealing. A woman with gambling debts and a history of questionable financial decisions who'd been unusually interested in Corey's business success. Someone who'd repeatedly suggested that Jeanette deserved better and who'd made subtle comments about the dangerous nature of Corey's work. Both women had been preparing for this betrayal for years, possibly from the beginning of his marriage. At 4 a.m., Corey received a call from an unknown number. He let it go to voicemail, then listened to a recording that confirmed his worst suspicions. "Nixon, this is your last warning. We have your daughter, we have your files, and we have enough evidence to destroy your reputation permanently. Transfer $5 million to the account number we'll send you. Disappear quietly, and maybe your family lives through this. Refuse, and we start sending pieces of the little girl to your office." They were amateurs. Real professionals never made threats. They simply acted. The fact that they were trying to negotiate told Corey they were overconfident and underprepared for the level of response they triggered. He called Bruce Eastman's secure line. Status report. Package is secure and asking for her daddy. She's scared but unharmed. Want me to put her on the line? Negative. Maintain security protocols. I'll be wrapping this up within 72 hours. Roger that. And Corey? The little one mentioned something about Mom bringing strange men to the house even before this Joel character. Might want to check your surveillance archives. After hanging up, Corey spent the next hour reviewing months of surveillance footage he'd previously skimmed. The pattern was clear. Jeanette had been hosting meetings with various men for over 6 months, always when Corey was out of town. Some faces he recognized from wanted posters in his files. Contract killers, information brokers, and thieves who specialized in high-value targets. His wife had been planning this betrayal for months, possibly years. She'd been using their home as a headquarters for a criminal enterprise that targeted wealthy divorce clients and their investigators. The depth of the betrayal was actually liberating. It meant Corey could respond without moral complexity or emotional conflict. These weren't misguided family members who'd made poor choices. They were career criminals who'd made the fatal mistake of targeting someone with the skills and resources to fight back. By dawn, Corey had assembled a complete picture of the conspiracy and the personnel he'd need to eliminate it. Joel Walsh was the muscle and the connection to organized crime. Donna Tyler was the inside information source and the financial coordinator. The unknown brunette was likely the operational planner, someone with tactical experience who designed the kidnapping and extortion scheme. And Jeanette was the mastermind, the spider at the center of a web that had been years in the making. Corey opened his weapons safe and began selecting equipment for what would be his final family reunion. The .45 pistol was reliable but limited. The tactical knife was silent but required close proximity. The explosives were thorough but indiscriminate. For this job, he needed something that would send a message to anyone else who might consider targeting his family. Precision, efficiency, and absolute finality. He selected 3 items that would serve his purposes perfectly: a combat shotgun for close-quarters work, a suppressed rifle for distance elimination, and a small device that would ensure none of his targets ever hurt another family. 20 years ago, he'd learned that betrayal was the one crime that required the death penalty. Tomorrow, he would teach that lesson to his wife and her accomplices. The hunter was done pretending to be prey. Chapter 5. Setting the Trap. Wednesday morning, Corey Nixon began the performance of his life. He called his wife at her office, his voice carefully crafted to sound defeated and panicked. "Jeanette," they called again. "They want $5 million by Friday or... God, I can't even say it. They have pictures of Myra, and they're threatening too." He let his voice break convincingly. "Oh, honey, Jeanette's voice was perfectly pitched between concern and satisfaction. Maybe we should just pay them. Your business is worth more than that, right? We could liquidate some assets, use the emergency accounts. I don't have that kind of liquid cash. The business is worth it, but everything's tied up in investments and client trust accounts. I'd have to— Corey paused, as if the idea was just occurring to him. I'd have to access the Steelcase files. There's information there worth 10 times what they're asking. The silence on the other end told him everything. Jeanette was probably signaling to someone, confirming that their plan was working. If that's what it takes to save our daughter, she said finally. Do whatever you have to do. After hanging up, Corey spent the morning constructing an elaborate deception. He created false financial documents showing massive debts and liquidity problems. He prepared dummy files for the Steelcase that contained enough real information to seem authentic, but nothing that would actually harm his client. Most importantly, he set up a meeting location that would serve as the perfect killing ground. The abandoned Riverside warehouse on the outskirts of town had been the site of one of his first cases as a private investigator. A missing persons job that had ended with him discovering a human trafficking ring. The building had been condemned afterward, but Corey had maintained access through a contact in the city planning office. More importantly, he'd spent 3 years using it as a training facility, memorizing every sightline, every hiding spot, every tactical advantage it offered. At 2 p.m., he called the number the kidnappers had provided. I have what you want. Riverside Warehouse, Building C, tonight at midnight. Come alone, or I burn everything and disappear. Joel Walsh's voice was cocky and confident. You're not in a position to make demands, old man. We'll come with enough firepower to level that building if we have to. Bring an army if it makes you feel safer. Just remember, if anything happens to me, the real Steel files get delivered to the FBI automatically. Your choice. After hanging up, Corey spent the afternoon turning the warehouse into a tactical maze. Herbert Lloyd positioned himself in the water tower half a mile away with a Barrett .50 caliber rifle and night vision scope. Francisco Huber set up motion sensors and remote cameras throughout the building complex. Vernon Lord planted listening devices and small explosive charges at strategic locations. But Corey's most important preparation was psychological. He called Jeanette one final time, his voice breaking with manufactured despair. They agreed to the exchange. I'm meeting them tonight with everything, the files, the account information, everything we've built together. If this goes wrong— It won't go wrong, Jeanette interrupted, dropping her act for just a moment. Just do what they say and come home safe. The slip confirmed what Corey had suspected. Jeanette knew exactly how the evening would unfold because she'd helped plan it. At 11 p.m., Corey arrived at the warehouse, carrying a briefcase that appeared to contain documents and a laptop. In reality, it held a small arsenal and enough plastic explosive to bring down the entire building if necessary. The first sign that his enemies had underestimated him came when Herbert's voice crackled through his earpiece. Boss, we've got 12 hostiles approaching from 3 directions. Military formation, automatic weapons, night vision gear. These aren't street thugs. Copy that. Positions: 2 teams of 4 flanking east and west. 1 team of 4 coming through the main entrance. Unknown female in tactical gear leading the western team. Corey smiled in the darkness. They'd brought enough firepower to eliminate a small army, which meant they'd never intended for him to survive the exchange. They wanted the files, the money, and the insurance payout from his death. Vernon, Francisco, initiate Phase 1. The warehouse suddenly blazed with floodlights that had been connected to a backup generator. The attacking teams immediately went defensive, seeking cover and regrouping. But in the few seconds they'd been blinded and disoriented, Corey had disappeared into the building's interior. His voice echoed through speakers he'd positioned throughout the complex. Joel Walsh, Federal Prison Number 47,821-198. Served 7 years for trafficking minors across state lines. Donna Tyler, current gambling debt approximately $300,000 to organizations that don't accept late payments. Jeanette Harrell Nixon, maiden name Jeanette Harrell, No known previous marriages despite claiming her first husband died in Iraq. The suite door was unlocked. Jeanette's first mistake of the morning. She was standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, still wearing the black dress she'd chosen for her widow's performance. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman who believed she'd won. "Hello, Jeanette." She spun around, her face cycling through shock, confusion, and fear before settling on a mask of relief, so convincing it would have fooled anyone who didn't know her true nature. "Corey, thank God you're safe. I was so worried when you didn't come home. What happened? Did they hurt our baby?" "Our baby is fine. She's somewhere you'll never find her, being protected by people who actually care about her welfare." Something in his tone made Jeanette step backward. "What do you mean? Where is she?" "Corey, you're scaring me." "Am I?" Corey moved into the suite's living area, noting the packed suitcases by the door and the forged passport on the coffee table. "You seem to have been preparing for a trip. Going somewhere. I thought if those people came looking for us, we might need to disappear for a while. Just until this whole thing blows over." Corey picked up the passport, which bore Jeanette's photo but the name Rebecca Walsh, Joel's sister, according to the family information he'd extracted from Catherine Norton. "Interesting choice of alias. Though I suppose it makes sense, considering you've been planning this with Joel for months." Jeanette's mask finally slipped, revealing the calculating predator beneath. "How much do you know?" "Everything. I know about the meetings in our house while I was out of town. I know about the surveillance you've been conducting on my clients. I know about the insurance policy you took out on me 3 months ago. I know you deliberately put our daughter in danger to manipulate me into a vulnerable position. She was never in real danger. She was traumatized and brutalized by your associates. That makes it real danger, regardless of your intentions." Jeanette moved toward the window, perhaps calculating whether the balcony offered an escape route. "You don't understand. This wasn't personal. This was business. You have access to information worth millions of dollars, and you were too naive to monetize it properly. So you decided to kill me and take it. I decided to set us up for life. The divorce business is lucrative, Corey. Wealthy people will pay enormous sums to get leverage over their spouses. Your client files are worth more than your little detective agency could earn in decades." Corey felt the familiar calm that preceded violence. "And our marriage? Our family? Was any of it real?" Jeanette laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "You were a means to an end from the beginning. A damaged military veteran with useful skills and no family connections to complicate things. Perfect for what I needed. What you needed was a victim. What you got was a predator who was better at this game than you are. Where are Joel and the others?" "Dead. All of them. I spent the night eliminating every person involved in the conspiracy against my family." Jeanette's face went pale. "You're lying. Joel was a professional. Catherine Norton was ex-military intelligence. They had backup plans. They underestimated their target, just like you did." Corey drew the suppressed pistol in one fluid motion, holding it steady as Jeanette backed against the window. "You can't kill me, Corey. I'm your wife. You love me. I love the person I thought you were. That person never existed. What you are is a predator who used my daughter as bait to set up my murder. What you are is a cancer that I'm about to cut out of my family's life permanently." "Wait." Jeanette's voice was desperate now. "The money. There's $8 million in accounts Joel set up. Untraceable funds from previous jobs. I can give you the access codes. We can disappear together, start over somewhere else. I don't want her blood money. I want you dead. Think about Myra. She needs her mother. You can't make her an orphan over this." The mention of his daughter made Corey's finger tighten on the trigger. Myra needs protection from predators who would use her as a weapon. That includes her mother. I gave birth to her. I raised her. You can't just. You tortured her to manipulate me. You were willing to let strange men hurt her to further your scheme. You stopped being her mother the moment you chose money over her safety. Jeanette made a desperate lunge for her purse, which likely contained a weapon of her own. Corey's first shot took her in the shoulder, spinning her around and slamming her against the window. The second shot was center mass, dropping her to the floor. As she lay dying, Jeanette looked up at him with eyes full of hatred rather than remorse. You think you've won? There are others, people who know about your clients. This isn't over. Yes, it is. The final shot was a mercy she didn't deserve, but that Corey gave her anyway. He spent the next hour eliminating all evidence of his presence in the suite. The hotel's security cameras had been disabled by Vernon Lord the previous evening. The keycard Jeanette had used was registered to one of her aliases. The forensic evidence would suggest a falling out among criminals rather than a domestic homicide. By the time Corey left the Riverside Hotel, Jeanette Harrell Nixon had become just another casualty in what the media would later describe as a turf war between organized crime groups. Her mother, Donna Tyler, would be found dead in her home that afternoon, the victim of an apparent heart attack brought on by stress. The conspiracy against the Nixon family had been permanently resolved with the kind of efficiency that left no loose ends and no surviving threats. Corey drove toward Bruce Eastman's compound to collect his daughter, his mind already focused on the future rather than the past. Myra would need therapy to deal with her trauma, but she would recover surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her welfare. The predators who tried to destroy his family were dead. The threats had been neutralized. The hunter had protected his territory and eliminated every challenge to his pack. For the first time in weeks, Corey Nixon felt at peace. Chapter 8. Cleaning House. 3 days after Jeanette's death, Corey Nixon sat across for Detective Leonard Hood in the Westfield Police Department's interview room. The conversation was a formality. Hood had been one of Corey's contacts in law enforcement for years, and both men understood the game being played. "Terrible thing about your wife," Hood said, sliding a coffee across the table. "Hotel security footage shows her meeting with known criminals in the days before her death. Looks like she got involved with some dangerous people." "I had no idea," Corey replied, his grief perfectly performed. "Jeanette had been acting strangely lately, but I thought it was stress from work. If I'd known she was in danger." These organized crime types don't leave witnesses. The whole crew got eliminated. Joel Walsh, Catherine Norton, even your mother-in-law. Professional job, probably a rival gang, cleaning house. Corey nodded sadly. "At least Myra wasn't here to see any of this. I sent her to stay with family upstate when I realized something was wrong." The last piece of information he discovered just hours earlier. His wife had never been married before, which meant her tragic backstory about losing her first love to war had been complete fabrication designed to manipulate his protective instincts. "Unknown female operator," Corey continued. "Facial recognition identifies you as Catherine Norton, former Army intelligence officer dishonorably discharged for selling classified information. Current warrant outstanding in Virginia for murder of a federal judge." He paused, letting the implication sink in. "You came here expecting to rob and murder a naive civilian. Instead, you've walked into a prepared battlefield against someone who's killed more enemy combatants than all of you combined." Joel Walsh's voice came through a bullhorn. "We have her daughter, Nixon. Surrender now, or—" "No, you don't." Corey's voice was calm and certain. "My daughter is 200 miles away with a man who's killed Taliban commanders with his bare hands. What you have is a half-baked plan and about 30 seconds before I start reducing your numbers." The first explosive charge detonated near the Eastern team's position. Vernon had placed it perfectly, close enough to disorient and injure, but not close enough to kill immediately. Corey wanted them alive for the next phase of his plan. As the smoke cleared and the remaining attackers regrouped, Corey's voice echoed through the darkness one final time. "You made one crucial mistake. You assumed that someone who loved his family was weak. You're about to learn that a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous predator on Earth." The hunt was about to begin. Chapter 6. The Predator Revealed. The first kill came at 12:17 a.m., when Francisco Huber's expertise with explosives eliminated 2 of the Eastern assault team members who'd taken cover behind what they'd assumed was a solid concrete barrier. The shaped charge he'd planted there earlier turned their shelter into shrapnel that painted the warehouse floor. Catherine Norton's voice crackled over their communication system. "Abort and regroup. This is a trap." But Corey had anticipated their retreat routes. As the surviving team members fell back toward their vehicles, they found their path blocked by Herbert Lloyd's precision shooting from the water tower. The .50 caliber rounds didn't just stop their advance. They eliminated cover and concealment with devastating efficiency. "You can run," Corey's voice echoed through the darkness, "but you can't escape. And you can't call for backup because Vernon's been jamming your communications for the past hour." Joel Walsh broke cover, firing wildly into the warehouse interior. "Come out and fight like a man, you coward." Corey materialized from the shadows like a nightmare given form. His combat shotgun spoke once, and Walsh's left kneecap disintegrated. The man collapsed, screaming, but very much alive. Fighting like a man would imply you deserve that level of respect. Corey's voice was conversational as he approached the wounded kidnapper. "But you torture children for money. That makes you something less than human." The second shot removed Walsh's right elbow. The third shattered his left ankle. "Where's my wife?" Through his agony, Walsh gasped out an address. Riverside Hotel, penthouse suite. She's waiting for confirmation." "Confirmation of what?" "Your death, insurance, $2 million policy." Corey nodded and put the final shot through Walsh's forehead. He learned in Afghanistan that mercy was a luxury that got good people killed. The remaining attackers lasted another 15 minutes. Catherine Norton proved to be professionally competent, but ultimately outmatched by Corey's preparation and his team's superior positioning. When the warehouse finally fell silent, 6 bodies lay scattered across the concrete floor, and 3 wounded survivors were secured with zip ties. "Boss," Herbert's voice came through the earpiece. "Police and fire response approximately 10 minutes out." Someone called in the explosions. Corey had anticipated this as well. "Vernon, initiate cleanup protocol." "Francisco, prep the survivors for transport." The cleanup protocol was a system Corey had developed during his early days as a private investigator, when he'd occasionally needed to make evidence disappear. Industrial acid would eliminate DNA evidence. Thermite charges would destroy electronic devices, and strategic placement of accelerants would ensure any remaining evidence was consumed by fire. But the 3 survivors were transported to a secondary location, an abandoned mine shaft 40 miles outside the city. Corey needed information about the full scope of the conspiracy before he eliminated the remaining threats. 2 hours later, Catherine Norton was secured to a chair in the mine's main chamber, her professional composure finally cracking under the weight of her situation. "Your wife hired me 6 months ago," she admitted. "Said she needed help eliminating a dangerous husband who was becoming suspicious. The plan was to stage a kidnapping, get access to your client files, liquidate your assets, and make your death look like retaliation from one of your cases." "Who else was involved?" "Just us. Jeanette, her mother, Walsh, and me. Your wife said you were paranoid, but predictable, that you'd respond exactly like a concerned father when your daughter was threatened." Corey absorbed this information while cleaning his weapons. She was right. I did respond like a concerned father. I eliminated every threat to my child's safety. She's waiting for confirmation that you're dead. When Walsh doesn't report in, she'll assume the plan failed and try to disappear. "No," Corey said quietly. "She won't run. She's too arrogant to believe she can lose to someone she's been manipulating for 15 years. She'll wait for dawn, then go to the warehouse to see what went wrong." Catherine Norton's eyes widened as she realized the implications. "You're going to kill your own wife." "Jeanette stopped being my wife the moment she orchestrated an attack on my daughter. Now she's just another predator that needs to be eliminated." The mine shaft was deep enough that the sounds wouldn't carry to the surface. When Corey emerged 2 hours later, the conspiracy against his family had been permanently resolved, and the location of several $1 million in stolen assets had been recovered. Dawn was breaking as he drove back toward the city. His phone contained a text message from Jeanette. "Haven't heard from you. Getting worried. Call me when you get this." Corey smiled and typed back. "Everything went perfectly. Coming home soon. Love you." It would be the last lie he ever told his wife. When he arrived at the Riverside Hotel penthouse suite, Jeanette Harrell Nixon would finally meet the man she'd married. Not the gentle father and husband she'd been manipulating, but the predator who'd survived Afghanistan and eliminated every threat to his family's safety. The woman who'd spent months planning his destruction was about to learn that some betrayals carried a death sentence. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. At 6:43 a.m., Corey Nixon stood in the elevator of the Riverside Hotel, ascending to the penthouse suite where his wife waited for confirmation of his death. He'd cleaned the blood from his hands and changed into fresh clothes, but the tactical knife remained strapped to his thigh and the suppressed pistol was tucked against his spine. Smart move. Kids don't need to be exposed to this kind of violence. Hood closed the file. We're classifying this as gang-related homicides. No family involvement suspected. Insurance companies might drag their feet on the life insurance payout, but that's standard procedure. After leaving the police station, Corey drove to his office to begin the process of rebuilding his life. His business had already received 3 new high-profile cases in the past week. Word traveled fast in certain circles that Corey Nixon was someone who could handle situations that required discretion and permanent solutions. The Randall Steele case had concluded successfully, with Corey's client receiving a settlement worth $47 million. Steele's gratitude had come in the form of a generous bonus and referrals to other wealthy individuals who valued privacy and results above legal niceties. But Corey's most important business was personal. He spent the afternoon reviewing financial records and legal documents, ensuring that his wife's death would result in the clean transfer of all assets to himself and Myra. Jeanette's debts, including the gambling obligations her mother had accumulated, would die with her, leaving no complications for his daughter's future. At sunset, he drove to Bruce Eastman's compound to collect Myra. She ran to him the moment he arrived, her small arms wrapping around his waist with desperate strength. "Daddy, I missed you so much. Is Mommy really dead?" "Yes, sweetheart. Some very bad people hurt her, but they can't hurt anyone else now." Myra was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the resilience that children sometimes displayed in the face of trauma. "Are you sad?" Corey considered the question carefully. He felt no grief for Jeanette. The woman he'd mourned had been a fiction, a carefully constructed mask designed to manipulate his emotions. What he felt was relief that the threat to his daughter had been permanently eliminated, and satisfaction that justice had been served to those who'd betrayed his trust. But Myra needed a father who could help her process complex emotions, not a predator who saw the world in terms of threats and targets. "I'm sad that you lost your mother," he said finally. "And I'm angry that bad people try to hurt our family. But I'm grateful that you're safe, and I'm proud that you were brave when things got scary." That night, in the guest room at Bruce's compound, Corey tucked his daughter in a bed and answered her questions about what would happen next. "Will we move away from Westfield? Would you like to?" "I don't want to go back to that house. It doesn't feel safe anymore." Corey understood. The house where Jeanette had hosted criminal meetings and planned his murder would never feel like home to either of them. "We'll find a new place, somewhere with better security and room for you to grow up safely." "Will Uncle Bruce come with us?" "If you'd like him to." Uncle Bruce and some of his friends are very good at keeping families safe from bad people. Myra nodded sleepily. "I like Uncle Bruce. He taught me how to throw knives today." "Did he now?" Corey smiled despite himself. Bruce's idea of appropriate child development was unconventional but effective. A daughter who could defend herself would never be helpless against predators. "Daddy, the bad people who hurt Mommy, they can't come back, right?" "No, sweetheart. They can never come back. I made sure of that." 3 months later, Corey and Myra Nixon settled into a sprawling ranch house in rural Montana, 2 hours from the nearest city and surrounded by land that offered clear sight lines in all directions. Bruce Eastman and his security team maintained a compound on the adjacent property, providing both companionship and protection. The house was equipped with military-grade security systems, reinforced safe rooms, and enough weaponry to repel a small army. Myra's bedroom had 2 exits and bulletproof windows. The property had underground bunkers stocked with enough supplies to survive a siege. To visiting social workers and school officials, it looked like the home of a concerned father who'd taken reasonable precautions after his family had been targeted by criminals. In reality, it was a fortress designed by a man who understood that predators would always exist and that the only reliable protection was the capacity for overwhelming retaliation. Myra adapted to their new life with remarkable resilience. She excelled in her new school, made friends with the children of Bruce's team, and began training in self-defense techniques that would serve her well if she ever faced another threat. Most importantly, she never asked about the details of her mother's death or expressed any desire to return to their old life. Children were remarkably good at recognizing genuine safety, and Myra instinctively understood that her father had eliminated the dangers that had threatened their family. The nightmares stopped after 6 months. The hypervigilance faded after a year. By her 14th birthday, Myra Nixon was a confident, capable young woman who could field strip a rifle, detect surveillance, and disappear into wilderness terrain if necessary. She was also happy, loved, and protected by people who would kill anyone who threatened her welfare. Chapter 9. The Price of Betrayal. 5 years after the events that destroyed his first family, Corey Nixon stood on the deck of his Montana ranch, watching his 17-year-old daughter practice tactical driving with Bruce Eastman. Myra had grown into a formidable young woman, intelligent, confident, and lethal when necessary. More importantly, she was happy and secure in ways that would have been impossible if he'd chosen forgiveness over justice. The notification on his encrypted phone broke his contemplation. Vernon Lord's message was brief. Package delivered. Problem resolved. The problem had been Frank Dixon, a former associate of Jeanette's who'd recently been released from federal prison and had made the mistake of trying to contact Myra through social media. Dixon had apparently believed that enough time had passed for him to safely approach the Nixon family about unfinished business related to his deceased partners. Vernon's solution had been characteristically efficient. Dixon's death would be attributed to a prison rivalry that had followed him into civilian life. No connection to the Nixon family, no loose ends, no future complications. It was the 7th such resolution in 5 years. Word had spread through certain criminal networks that Corey Nixon's family was permanently off-limits, but occasionally someone would test that boundary. Each test resulted in swift, brutal elimination that reinforced the message. Betraying the Nixon family was a capital offense. "Dad, watch this." Myra's voice carried across the practice course as she executed a perfect J-turn at 40 miles per hour, her Mustang sliding sideways before straightening out with military precision. Corey smiled and applauded. His daughter had inherited his tactical instincts and his capacity for controlled violence, but she'd also developed the emotional intelligence and moral compass that his own upbringing had failed to provide. She would never be a victim, but she would also never become the kind of predator who targeted innocents. That evening, over dinner at the ranch house, Bruce raised the subject that had been on everyone's mind for months. The girl's ready for college, Corey. MIT accepted her early admission application. Full scholarship for computer science and cybersecurity. Myra looked between the two men, sensing the undercurrent of their conversation. "You're worried about me being away from the compound. College campuses aren't secure environments," Corey said carefully. "Lots of unknown variables, limited control over access and surveillance. Dad, I can't live in a fortress forever, and MIT has one of the best cybersecurity programs in the world. I want to learn how to protect people the way you've protected me." The conversation continued for hours, covering security protocols, communication procedures, and contingency plans. By the end of the evening, they developed a framework that would allow Myra to attend college while maintaining the safety measures that had kept her alive and free from threats. Francisco Huber would relocate to Cambridge and establish a security perimeter around the campus. Herbert Lloyd would provide long-range overwatch from strategic positions in the city. Vernon Lord would handle electronic surveillance and communication security. It was expensive and complex, but Corey had learned that no price was too high to pay for his daughter's safety and future. 2 years later, Myra graduated summa cum laude with dual degrees in computer science and criminal justice. Her senior thesis on digital forensics techniques had been classified by the Department of Homeland Security and resulted in job offers from every major federal law enforcement agency. She chose instead to return to Montana and join her father's private investigation business, which had expanded into a specialized security consulting firm that served high-net-worth individuals and corporations facing complex threats. Nixon Security Solutions employed former military personnel exclusively and had developed a reputation for resolving problems that traditional law enforcement couldn't handle. Their client list was confidential, their methods were effective, and their success rate was 100%. The business thrived because Corey had learned the fundamental truth that most people refuse to acknowledge. In a world full of predators, survival required either accepting victimhood or becoming a more dangerous predator than those who threatened you. On Myra's 21st birthday, father and daughter sat on the same deck where Corey had once watched her practice tactical driving. She was now a full partner in the business, with her own team and her own cases. More importantly, she was alive, successful, and surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her welfare. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Killing Mom and the others instead of trying to work things out?" Corey considered the question seriously. "Do you remember being scared? Being hurt? Being used as bait to manipulate me? I remember feeling helpless and confused. I remember thinking you might not be able to save me. Your mother was willing to let strangers torture you to further her scheme. She chose money over your safety, criminal associates over family loyalty. That wasn't a marriage problem or a communication issue. That was a fundamental character defect that would have eventually gotten you killed." Myra nodded slowly. "I've studied the psychological profiles you compiled on all of them. Mom scored higher for psychopathy than most serial killers. She wasn't going to change or get better with therapy. Predators don't reform, sweetheart. They just get better at hiding their true nature until they see an opportunity to strike. Your mother had been planning my murder for years, possibly from the beginning of our marriage. The only thing that stopped her from eventually targeting you directly was my intervention. I'm glad you saved me, Dad, and I'm glad you taught me to save myself." That night, as Corey performed his evening security check of the compound, he reflected on the choices that had brought him to this point. He'd lost his first wife to her own criminal nature, but he'd gained a daughter who understood that strength and vigilance were the prices of safety in a dangerous world. The predators who tried to destroy his family were dead and forgotten. The threats that had once kept him awake at night had been permanently eliminated. Most importantly, the people he loved were safe, secure, and capable of defending themselves against whatever dangers the future might bring. Corey Nixon had learned early in life that betrayal was the one crime that demanded the death penalty. He'd applied that lesson ruthlessly and completely, ensuring that no one who threatened his family would live to threaten them again. In the end, it hadn't been about revenge or justice or moral principles. It had been about survival, protection, and the simple truth that some people were too dangerous to be allowed to continue existing. The hunter had won. The predators were dead. And the next generation was ready to carry on the tradition of never allowing family to be betrayed without consequences. Standing guard over his territory as he had for